Hello, how are you?
I am doing great, actually. We just got back like 15 minutes ago from buying my daughter a car. So that's kind of fun.
Really?
Yeah, he's we're in the middle of this giant swap. My It starts with bad news, but my son's car is not well. There's a knocking sound in the engine that means one of the rods is
Oh,
bent, and
yeah.
that's not a cheap fix.
No.
And so that there's a really good chance that means we're going to get rid of his car and he's actually going to get my car and then I'm going to get a new car. But before we do all of that, we just need another car. And so even though my daughter doesn't actually need a car for a couple of months, we decided to get her car because it's the cheap one soon. That way we can think about the expensive purchase a little bit longer. So she's
Oh,
super
yeah.
excited. She has a car, and we can kind of think a little bit more about and watch for a better deal on the expensive car we might want to get. I mean, expensive for us. Uh, Still going to be
Yeah.
used, still going to be cheap, but less cheap. Um, so
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
all of that to say, I am doing good. My daughter's going to get home today. She has seen her car. It's kind of a beater, but it's great. It is a Prius with 230,000 miles on it, which means it's got about 700,000 miles left to go. Um,
Yeah. Oh, dude, don't I know it?
you
Well,
do. You are the reason
that's
we buy Priuses.
oh man, yeah. Well, that's so ironic because my son's Prius died last week and it had 360,000 miles on it. And for the last 50,000 miles, it has had a check engine light on and multiple codes. And we're like, no, we'll just drive it till it dies. And then it died. And so I just bought him another Prius that had 187,000 miles on it. And I'm like, dude, you got like years left on this thing.
Real,
So,
right? I mean, that's the thing. We lucked out. This has a little bit of body damage on the hood, so it was super cheap.
oh,
Um,
great.
so, anyways, how are you doing? I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am also doing great. My brain fog from being sick has cleared. And so I'm reading books again. I am translating. I am studying. My world is complete if I have books happening in my life. And that is what's happening. So I feel great.
Well, speaking of, I called you last week, and this is what I want to talk about today. There was a book that I was reading, and I said, "Hey, I want you to read this. I'm giving you a week, and then I want to talk about it." Uh,
Yes.
so
Yes. And I
I
read it.
take it you have finished. This is Adam McHugh's The Listening Life.
It is. And I tell you what, I mean, I loved this book. There were so many good things about this book. I don't know at what point in your reading of it you said, "Hey, you should read this too." Were you done with it by that point?
Oh no, I was through maybe chapter 2 and I just thought to myself, "Oh, no. We got to talk about this. This captures so many themes that we think are important in a really beautiful kind of I mean, not only is the content great, but the writing is beautiful. I don't know if you listened to it or read it, but the narrator does a brilliant job. Like this was good on so many levels.
Yeah, it was absolutely. Um, yes. Yeah, I loved it. So, but here is the biggest golden nugget that came out of this book for me. This was worth the price of admission all by itself. And that is, he revealed to me, okay, of course, he spoke my love language, which is the biblical languages. He said, oftentimes we talk about how Solomon asked for wisdom, and that's not wrong, but it's also not the exact words that were put in the Hebrew Bible. The exact words are a listening heart. And I had to look it up. And sure enough, it says listening heart. It's the Hebrew word Shema, right? Like Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu. Like, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. He wants a listening heart, of course, to be able to judge rightly and with discernment. And when we put all of that together, we're talking about wisdom. But where does wisdom start? It starts with a listening heart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I want.
Yeah, he had a couple of moments that I thought his exegesis was just. Sometimes people pull in things like biblical languages just to like look smart. The touch moments he did were every one of them. There was something powerful about it. And this is a great example. As a matter of fact, I don't want to dig into this too much because I think we're going to talk almost entirely about wisdom next week.
We sure are.
Yeah. And so I am out of my mind excited about that conversation. We're going to dig into Proverbs chapter 4, which you're going to be preaching on in a couple of weeks. So for our listeners, please read Proverbs chapter 4 and then come back for our conversation about it and about wisdom. But yeah, the fact that the basic argument that a listening life is the nature, that wisdom is marked by a listening life, I thought was brilliant. But then the other piece, the thing that like fires me up kind of that same way, again, I've never heard anybody actually say this. He said, the fact that we believe in the Trinity suggests that listening has been happening for all of eternity, that the nature of God is fundamentally to be a listener.
Yes. So I actually pulled a bunch of quotes off of this book because there's so many golden nuggets here. And I wrote that one down in specific. He said, a dialogue is not only happening between God and us, but the very conversation of God, the Trinitarian trialogue, is carrying on inside of us. And that was powerful.
Yes. To remember that every act of listening is actually an intentional participation in the life of God, no matter what I'm listening to. Because if I'm listening to, and he gets into all of this, like listening to creation and listening to the scriptures and listening to other people and listening even to my own heart, to know that God is at work in all of those places and that God is speaking in all of those places, and to think that he is speaking in conversation with himself and I get to listen in.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's so much of God speaking that we get to listen to. But I think the other part of the point that he's making is that within the Trinity itself, not only is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit speaking to one another, it implies that the other two are listening.
Yes.
That there is listening happening within the Trinity. God is a listening God. And in fact, he really even kind of kicks off the book by going, hey, can we just pause and just marvel for a second that God actually is a listening God? Like, really important people don't listen to non-important people. Like, and yet the God of the universe listens to us. Like, that should cause us to pause.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In my pastoring work, I had a variety of opportunities to meet some interesting people. When I was in Massachusetts, I got to sit in on a very small meeting with the mayor. When I moved to Springfield, my denomination is centered here, so I've been in some very small meetings with the national superintendent, kind of the head guy in our movement. None of those people, and I don't fault them for this, but none of those people sat there and thought, what does Joshua think about anything?
Right.
And frankly, none of them should, because I am not qualified to do either of their jobs. And so the thought of God, the creator, the sustainer of all things, pausing to listen to me, not as an interruption in what he's normally doing, but as an extension of the listening that is happening within the Trinity. He is being himself and still listening to me. As much as we take that for granted, when he just said all of that way, it blew me away.
Yeah. And if I jump to the end of the book as to help put this in perspective, this is, Paul often makes the how much greater argument, where he takes a thing and says, if it works this way in this sphere, how much more does it work in the heavenly sphere? And so I want to make a similar argument here by jumping to the end of the book. And he challenges us as a Christian community to flip listening on its head. And he said, what if instead of coming to church to be preached to, people came to church to be heard? What if the body of believers was known less as a preaching community and more of a listening community? And that seems so radical on its face, right? We'd have to change all of our church billboards and signs from here's the sermon this week to what would you like to say this week? That's and just the whole structure of church. Like we have a whole 30 minutes devoted to a pastor getting up there and talking. So anyway, it's just mind-boggling to even conceive of what he's suggesting here. And then when we extrapolate that out to the God of the universe listens to us, wow.
Just, it blows my mind. And it awakens in me this sort of sense that listening, for me at least, is more than just some random thing. I want to be a listener. I want my life to be a listening life. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And that's, I feel called to this as well. And yet we don't have a descriptor for this. I mean, I guess if we were to when we say professional listener, we would probably think of a therapist. So maybe they're the only people in our society that we consider to be professional listeners. But you're taking on the role of a coach, which has an affinity to therapy. I don't, is that safe to say?
Yeah, particularly when it's mental health coaching, it's affinity is a great word.
And so maybe you get a pass for that. Like you actually get a role within society that people grasp and understand. I feel called to a listening life as well, but that means I listen to employees as a supervisor. It means I take people out to coffee shops and listen intently to what they have to say. I listen closely to my kids and to my wife and to my family. Like that doesn't feel like a role. It doesn't feel like something one would be called to. And yet I feel the same pull that you just described to this listening life.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Like this is not the work that I'm doing as a coach is just a small piece of what it means to live a life marked by vocationally committed to listening, right? Like it's so much more than that. Despite the fact that, by the way, you are also in an industry that we all desperately hope is committed to listening well. Let's not forget that.
That is actually quite true, right? Yes, you want your 911 representatives to be listening quite well.
Yes, and so it's admittedly a different thing, but I would argue you are in a listening profession.
We are. But here's the difference between what I do professionally and what this author is really pushing us to. And that is, I have a goal and a mission that I'm trying to accomplish in my
Mm.
listening. I don't need, and honestly, I will prevent you from giving me your whole story. That wastes time. There's certain information I need, and there's a whole lot that I don't need. So I'm going to direct the conversation. I'm going to ask you these questions, and I'm going to insist upon the answers so that we can drive this forward and we can get the right help to the right place in a timely fashion. And that sounds, from a listening perspective, when we really talk about listening, that's rude. And that's not listening. That's commanding and taking over. Like, I want to be heard. And I think sometimes we run into issues in our job professionally because people sometimes take offense, or maybe we do that without a lot of tact or skill. We really try to drive the conversation where it needs to go. It's actually the right thing to do, but it feels abrasive, or it can feel abrasive to somebody. So the listening life, though, does not have a goal or an end or a destination we're trying to drive things to. We are literally just being open and listening, whatever that means.
Yeah, I that's a great distinction to make. And I think it emphasizes several of the challenges. First of all, I would argue that your choices to be commanding and direct and even potentially abrasive are fundamentally deeply loving choices, even if it doesn't look like the way we would normally define love. Honestly, if you're the link between the police and the fire engine and my house, let's by all means make this as short as you want, even if I get mad at you in the moment, because I may need something other than you, but I still need you too. But nevertheless, there's this unique challenge. I think that many folks, their lives are training them to listen with purpose aforethought in a really unhelpful way in other situations, right? Like, I think I said this to you just the other day. I was in the middle of my training to be a coach at the company that I work for, and I have read Stephen Covey's book 10, 15 times. And the first principle in it is begin with the end in mind. That is so deeply ingrained in me that when I saw a coaching session in which the end was non-existent, there actually was a goal and everything, but still the end was completely open. And the coach was more than happy to not kind of linearly focus on an end. I was so uncomfortable. And I
Yes.
called you and I was like, I now have to throw out one of the leadership books that I have spent my entire life cultivating in, like, the habits of in myself. And I think this is the challenge we end up with in the listening life, is that we have to have a different set of skills and priorities.
And motivations, right? When
Mm.
I'm listening to somebody on 911 call, my motivation is to get the right help to the right place in a timely fashion. That is my motivation for listening. But if we change our motivation to be nothing but listening, I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to correct your flawed thinking or to give you a solution. I'm not here to, I'm not going to respond in a way that soothes my anxiety. I am here simply and solely to listen to you. And so there's this great quote that he has. Basically, he said, we have to want to listen. He said, so if desire is a key to good listening, the root of bad listening is not flawed technique, but a lack of motivation. Motivation will cover any number of listening transgressions. And I really appreciate that, because what is the heart with which I am here and present to you? What am I trying to accomplish? And if it's listening, then that's going to be my motivation. It's going to drive everything else I do.
Oh, yes, this is exactly it. And I wish I had the quote where he said this. I actually think it was in the internal listening chapter, like listening to yourself. One of the things he talks about is, and one of the things I was most deeply struck by in this book, is that listening isn't a skill set you just cultivate in certain moments with certain people. It is, in fact, a holistic approach to living life. And so he encourages us as listeners to be thinking, what does it mean to listen to Scripture? What does it mean to listen to God in nature? What does it even mean to listen to my own soul? I think all of those kinds of things give us, all those areas give us just a host of opportunities to practice what you just described. A listening that is not trying to control.
Yes. Yes. And a listening that is willing to be vulnerable.
Hmm?
He talks in a couple of different places. He doesn't really use the word vulnerable, but in a number of different places, he references ideas that really I would categorize as vulnerability. First, he talks about how listening starts with listening to yourself, listening to your own life, and being willing to acknowledge the way that you feel about certain things and naming emotions and those types of things. And I'll tell you, I grew substantially in my skill as a listener when I learned to name and experience my own emotions, because then I could understand the emotions of someone else. I could empathize with them. I could literally put myself in their shoes. Even if I'd never experienced that exact situation before, I know what it is within myself to feel a variety of different emotions. And so if I can be adept at feeling my own emotions, naming them, understanding them, wrestling with them, one, I can put myself in their shoes a lot easier. And two, I can notice when things arise within myself as I listen that cause me anxiety, that cause me some self-doubt or whatever else may arise within me. And I can name it, I can set it aside, and I can come right back to listening. And those are skills that only come with a measure of vulnerability about listening to ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, and I would add, and maybe this is kind of a combination of those two, but another skill, or maybe another level of the empathy skill that comes from being able to name your own emotions, is being able to recognize what emotions come up in you because of the person's story that you're listening to, and then and the moment I recognize, let's say you're talking about we talked about cars a lot. Let's say you're talking about, your car breaking down. I might have certain emotional responses as a result of my experience with cars breaking down. And until I recognize that I'm having those feelings, one of the easiest things for me to do is assume you're having the same feelings I would have. When you might not. I might be super upset about the fact that my car broke down. You might be like, man, this was a piece of junk. We were just dying for it to break so that now we can get a new car. We just didn't feel like we could until this broke. And you might be thrilled. I don't give you the space to have emotions until I recognize my own emotions and how easy it is for me to assume them into your story.
Well, or the opposite, or not the opposite, or we are feeling a very similar emotion. So I was just meeting with somebody today who was expressing their own self-doubt around an area of spirituality and feeling like, man, other people have this thing together and I don't seem to have that same ability. Like I try and I try and I try and I just don't have the same skill set. and I want that skill set and I don't have it. And as they were saying those things, I was evaluating my own skill set in that area and also feeling like, oh, I probably don't have it all together. I know there are people that have this skill set to a much higher degree than I do. I too am feeling like I should be better in this area. And so I started to feel some of those same emotions about myself. And sure, okay, it sounds like we're probably experiencing the same emotions, but it's still not helping me listen. Because now I'm focused on me. He used a great analogy throughout the book. There's this arrow that lives over top of two people that are in dialogue. And the arrow is, where is the attention centered? And the arrow is constantly pressing to point to you. And you have to actively work to point that arrow back at the other person. And that was a moment where I had to stop and say, whoop, the arrow is pointing at me right now. This isn't about me. I have to point this arrow back at the person I'm listening to hear how they're experiencing their own life and their own story.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll be honest. So I loved his arrow analogy, but this is one of the places I may have disagreed with exactly the way he worded this. And I'm curious how you feel about this. He said, you captured exactly what I walked away from that with. One of the challenges that I think, or the dangers of this sort of, I got to force myself to get back into the listening space is, or to force the arrow to point back at the other person, is sometimes, at least in my experience, that act of returning the arrow towards the other person, step one is acknowledging my own feelings, noting them, and being willing to accept them and set them aside. But if I try to set them aside without becoming aware or accepting them, it becomes problematic. I actually can't turn the arrow. It's one of those things, if I try to shove the arrow in the other direction, I can't. But if I gently try to turn the arrow back in the other direction, it turns just fine. There's a gentleness to it for me that his words didn't quite capture, and I wondered if you find that to be true as well, or if that's just me.
I didn't have the same reaction to it in the moment that you described, but I absolutely agree with you in terms of the gentleness required to turn that arrow. You can't just shove down your emotions or your self-doubt or what have you and just be mad at yourself for it or think I should be better, now let me move on. You can't, there has to be a level of acceptance or a level, at the very least, a gentle acknowledgement, that's a wound I still need to deal with. Okay, I can deal with that later. But that's still a gentle response. It might not fully resolve everything that you've got going on under the surface, but it's at least a gentle response that says, okay, we touched on something there. I'll come back to that. Now let me go back to listening. Let me turn this arrow back to the other person.
Yeah, my coach trainer says she always envisions herself to have a bookshelf next to her. And whenever these moments come up, she thinks to herself, that's an interesting book. Okay, I'm going to close it now and put it back on the shelf and come back to it later. But it's on the shelf for later when I'm ready for it. And
yeah.
And just to be clear, I'm sure that I was reading more of myself into this moment than necessarily the author. I doubt the author was saying, just force yourself to listen. That would be very inconsistent with everything else he has said in the book. But
yes,
that's what it brought up for me anyway.
Well, and so one of the things that he brings up that I think falls perfectly in line with this is the way that we Christians tend to respond to that discomfort that lives in us as we listen. One of our bad habits as Christians is to take whatever anxiety wells up within us during the listening process and respond by quoting the Bible. And I'm going to give two quotes from his book that I think are wonderful. One is, few things shut down a person in pain faster than quoting the Bible at them.
Mm-hmm.
And man, is that so true. We don't need to just slap a Bible verse on there anyway, I think it speaks for itself. Here's the other thing that he said. He's really envisioning his role as a chaplain that he had in the hospital and going in and praying for people. This is kind of what he has in mind when he says this. He says, speaking truth into situations of pain is distracting. You get to stand behind your pulpit of your intercessory prayer that sounds a lot like a sermon, and the other person is a captive audience, and I love this. The other person is a captive audience trapped in the pew of your anxious truth.
Oh,
that was such a poignant line. We take that anxiety and we put anxious truth out there. We're so eager to slap a, Bible verse Band-Aid on top of whatever else the other person is dealing with because of the anxiety that wells up inside of us when we hear about it.
No, there's anxiety, discomfort, which I think raises the question. And let's be clear, we're not talking about a listening beginner's challenge. This happens to me, and this is my job. And it happens, as a matter of fact, it has happened today. I was in a coaching session today in which my own anxieties rose up. And I have hundreds of hours of training and all these, whatever, but still my anxieties came up, and it raises the question. And I think this is important to pause on is, okay, I'm not supposed to preach at them, but what do I do with my own feelings of anxiousness or discomfort to be able to turn the arrow back in the other direction?
Yeah.
Practically speaking, how do you do that?
Right. And he talked a lot about entering somebody else's world and entering their pain, their situation, their pit, right? We often talk about empathy as climbing down in the pit with somebody. And one of the things that he said we're entering into that is wildly uncomfortable is entering into the waiting. You ask about how do I try not to solve this problem or preach to somebody? It's being comfortable with the waiting. They're coming to me as the helper, and instead of helping, I'm going to wait with them for help to arrive. That feels less than helpful.
Yeah, it really does. And I'll be honest, there are moments that, let me back up. I think for me, what makes me so uncomfortable in moments like waiting is the powerlessness, right? I'm out of control. I don't like that a lot. And
yeah,
there are moments when I'm in those kind of conversations where my instinct is to assert control by preaching or whatever, and I actually turn my hands palms up on my lap without them even being able to, the other person necessarily even noticing, just as a sort of sign to God of acceptance. God, I'm in this moment. It's uncomfortable. I'm opening my hands in a gesture of just acknowledging the realities here. I accept being in this moment, and I'm not going to try to fix it. And sometimes I need something concrete like that to do that helps me reorient.
Yes. I think that's wonderful, in the moment kind of approach. And I want to come back to something you said earlier, though. You talked a lot about how this author brings a holistic view of listening to bear here, that in fact, we've camped out, you and I, substantially on this idea of listening to others. And that's important to both of us. But the author talks about listening from a variety of perspectives. And that's where he has the listening life being his title, and honestly his theme for this book. It's a whole life affair devoted to listening. And so you bring up a great little tool to use in the moment, which is flipping your hands open and just accepting the moment and surrendering it to God. I think that's great. But I also think building your life around this idea of listening, such as he describes, is the larger help, if you will. Obviously, it doesn't help in the moment. But it helps prepare you for the moment. And so he talks about listening, obviously, to scripture, listening to ourselves, listening to God. But he also talks about listening to nature, which sounds so like Zen or like very liberal theology or something here, but it really isn't. He quoted one of my favorite people, John Muir. John Muir was a naturalist. He fought for the preservation of Yosemite Park, and anyway, wonderful naturalist. But John Muir said, everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to the body and soul. And I was really drawn to that as an example of the listening life that prepares you for those moments. I personally need exactly what John Muir is talking about, places in nature to play in and pray in. I think that sets me up for those moments really well.
I find myself desperately needing and yet not being good at this exact thing. It has always been very natural to me to try too hard. I can overcomplicate anything if I want to, and I want to. And this is one of those great things. Like, I need to spend more time outside, and it is fascinating to me to note the ways in which I am more calm, more relaxed. Even, let's be honest, coming back to how do we deal with our own anxieties when we're talking to another person? I am much more able to deal with those things if I have listened to nature well for an extended period of time.
Yes.
Though for the life of me, whatever listening to nature is, it is not any of the things I try to do when I'm trying to listen to nature.
What do you mean?
I want to get like a clear sign from God when I'm out in nature. Like, that's what that means to me when I hear those words. Like, I want to have a profound theological thought because of the bird song. I want to be captivated by the fact that God's might and power are as big as the mountain in front of me, or something like something that's a very X plus Y equals Z sort of experience of nature. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You want the grand vision.
Yeah. And I am always walking in, like, looking for that to happen to me. Like, all right, is this the moment I'm going to be awed? Am I going to be astounded in this moment? Is this like, that is not a helpful thing. But
Right.
what is the thing that I am reminded about coming to nature? And this is actually from a different book on spirituality that's really about Jonathan Edwards' spirituality. It's called Formed for His Glory. And one of the things Edwards talks about is that our spiritual practices are ways of making room for God's grace in our life. The work is God's work, not my work. And that is nowhere more true. And maybe this is the biggest thing I ever get out of going into nature, is that I don't get to control, I don't get to force this. It's just a thing I can do to make room for God to do whatever God wants to do. And I come back every time more relaxed, more calm, more chill. I have connected with the peace of God without even trying, when I was trying to be awed, if that whole spiel makes any sense.
Yeah. So it totally helps me understand what you meant when you said I try to do one thing when I'm listening to nature, but God does a wholly different thing.
Yeah, it's the Ignatius actually said, my spiritual director quotes this every time I talk to him. God invites us in one door in order to show us out through another. And it's
Hmm.
Ignatius's way of saying, God lets us think we know why we're getting together and why we're talking to him. But he has a different plan, and he's just waiting until he can get us to do his plan because his plan's better.
Well, and how much more, if we can't even figure out our own plan and our own purpose for meeting with God, how can we presume to give advice or speak about the
Mm,
plan for somebody else? Like, why not just have the humility to give them space to wrestle and to wait? Because we can't even answer the question for ourselves, let alone for somebody else.
yeah, well, and to draw these two things together, I often need to give my own journey and my own heart that space. I need to give that to others and to myself. I don't get to control my journey any more than I get to control anybody else's. There are so many variables, and I just am in the moment that I'm in. I'm having the feelings, I'm having the thoughts. It's all just here, and whipping myself into shape or whipping somebody else into shape are not helpful, despite the fact that this was the general thing I tried to do as a pastor for 20 years. Like,
Yes.
I love this idea that it is non-directive listening. It is non-judgmental, right? Like I feel like that word gets overused, but in this case I think it's exactly right. It is non-judgmental listening. And we don't mean that as a pretend thing. You know, when I was pastoring, we often would joke about the fact that we assumed therapists were acting as if they were non-judgmental, but they knew where they were going to get you in the end.
Mm.
And that's because on some level, that's what we were doing. We were being empathic, but we were in control of the situation. We knew where we were going to get you in the end. And this is giving up on that. This is genuinely being willing to say, no, I don't know where we're going to end up in the end. And that's okay.
Yeah. And then to bring some of my comments back in, and then I'll wait with you. I
Ooh,
don't know where this is going,
yes.
but I'll wait with you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly that image of waiting captures all of this so beautifully. I think the listening life is a life of learning to wait quietly with other people, with nature, with scripture, to wait in a receptive posture.
Yes. Waiting with your hands open, like you just described, in your lap.
Mhm.
Let's just
Yeah.
wait together.
Yes.
Well, man, what a great book, and then what a great conversation. So thank you for talking about this book. Thank you for encouraging me to read it. And I want to turn to the audience and just ask, where are you at with listening? Have you had the experience of being listened to really, really well? Have you been able to listen well to others? What have you learned about the listening process? How are you growing in this skill? How would you like to grow in this skill? And how would you like the church to grow in this skill along with you? We'd love to just hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have to say, as we wrap up here, that what this reminds me of is I don't know if you ever watched Frasier,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
his
I'm
show,
listening.
I'm listening, right? But ironically, he almost never was. He always felt like he had the answer before you even got your words out. Um, and we would love to hear if you've had experiences that aren't that.
Hmm.
Moments of true being known as you shared safely and openly, and the other person was there. And how did that make you feel?
So good. Well, I am very much looking forward to our conversation next week on wisdom. So, yeah, I guess until then, I will catch you soon.
All right. I can't wait. It's going to be a good conversation. I'll talk to you then.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
What?
Wait a minute, so like, what's the car plan?